Hello and welcome to Hanger V Hobby Hangout, a unprofessional hobbyist podcast where we cover things such as plastic crack to booster packs and everything in between. Today I have with me Jumbo and Fata. So Fata, you have a interesting, I guess, would you consider this like a side hobby? It's not as like a side hustle type thing, right? But it's
It
I
used to
guess
be.
well, okay, I mean I guess like to put into some context, it involves like upcycling. Uh, is it garments or is it like more than that?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's garments. I definitely do a lot of my own clothes editing because I shop at thrift shops anyways. But honestly, the majority of it, especially in the last like I don't know, 4 or 5 years, has just been bags because I used to make bags as like a thing, and I would sell them at run fairs. But nowadays, I do a lot of camping, and so I'll often pick up like a backpack or something similar and do some edits to it to suit my purposes. I think the most common one that I usually do is I add molly webbing to stuff because boy howdy do I love molly webbing. If you guys don't know what that is, it's the straps you see on military gear that gives you modular pouches and stuff like that.
Yeah, actually, yes. Thank you for providing context there. So, how did you get into this in the first place?
Yeah, so when I was in college, and by that I mean I was like 18, 19. I was homeless because that was a fun time in my life, and I had ended up teaching myself how to sew clothing for the LARPing groups and the Ren fairs that we have in my area. And I made a decent clip sewing clothing and bags and pouches for folks because there was a great demand for it, and I didn't have much else to do because it was like go to class and then go and do some sewing for the day. And that's how I managed to hop couches and to keep myself out of trouble because it meant that I was doing something productive. And over time, I picked up all the skills needed to do this sort of modification. But I got out of the LARPing and Ren Fair scene a while ago and got a job, so I have a place to live, and this has just kind of turned into a way for me to just I guess recycle is definitely a good word, upcycling, but it's also kind of a repair thing. I don't know. It really started with me going to like whatever outlet you have in your area. I mean, they've got tons of them now, and just looking at the various camping gear that they have, I picked up a fanny pack one day, and I went, "Man, like the material on this is terrible. It's thin. I know a lot of it's just supposed to be so that way it's lightweight, but it wears out super quick." And so I started going around thrift shops looking for older, sturdier material made stuff that allows me to repair it. And over time, I've just sort of I have a eclectic collection of various things that have been modified, and I think that also mixes with something that I do with the camping thing, where I like to do ultra lightweight camping, where some people go with a backpack or whatever, but I'm the type of guy just to grab a tarp or something. And so rather than taking a big bulky day pack or something, I'll wear like a fanny pack and like a small like drop pouch, and you can't like buy those very easily. So I just end up modifying it out of stuff I find.
Cool. Um, so I guess a couple thoughts I have is,
Mhm.
were you into sewing and like this sort of thing before, or was it like, or I guess, how have your skills adapt? Have they like improved? Like, were you good at this from the get go, or was like this something like you've gotten better, like as you've like understood like your end goals with like maybe like modifications or upcycling or whatever
Mhm.
it is you're doing?
Yeah, I'd say that's actually probably the hobby aspect of it. Anybody who does sewing will tell you that making something like brand new is a lot easier than modifying it because generally with fabric you need extra space in order to do it. So yeah, I started as somebody who did a lot of sewing, and that was definitely the prerequisite. And this is something that has kind of evolved into a really unique aspect of uh, what a lot of folks would generally call like the type of upcycling or modifying of things. But I think one of the most common things I do is I'll put a like a liner inside of a pre-existing bag that doesn't have one because it makes it last longer. And
Mhm.
doing that, I mean, if you were to take apart the bag, you compromise a lot of integrity, and that kind of ruins the purpose. So figuring out, for example, how to put in a liner into a bag without having to actually take it apart, that takes like a lot of ingenuity, and that's definitely what I'd say is I guess the fun part of it to me. So you do need to have like an additional set of skills that I had to develop for this.
Cool. Um, So I know that you said like some of this you got into like from like the LARPing scene. Someone who also had some background in LARPing from my college days. I knew that there are people would like do the sort of disguised like modernity stuff, like where you have like it's like fantasy on the outside, but like it's really like nice and clean and modern, like inside, like whether it's like pouches or I wasn't sure like if you had any like sort of deals like that where you like were making you were like sort of like disguising things to like fit the fantasy aesthetic, but like maintaining like modern materials like on the inside, whether it's like for durability purposes or just because it's easier to acquire than like, some sort of linen or what
Mhm.
have.
Yeah, no, you've definitely hit a really important part of the LARPing scene for sure on that. There are a lot of different parts of that community, and in the Ren Fair community, the modern on the inside, fantasy on the outside is definitely like I'd call that the standard, because in a lot of places, the Ren Fair community is much more about like performative costuming than it is like actually being realistically depicted medieval experiences. But in the LARPing community, especially ones that have focusing on crafting, like the SCA, for example, they give additional points to authentically crafted pieces of gear that actually follow, the older style of things. So while you could use a sewing machine to save time, you do have to use like materials or like lack of fasteners or fixtures that are like no Velcro, for example. But I've sort of done all of it because I've done a lot of commission work where I'll pick up something for somebody, and if they wanted something modern, it's something you could include. But honestly, like that's part of the fun hobby for me now is that since I have such familiarity with those, being able to combine that with modern hardware is really fun. Honestly, I really love zippers, and snaps are it's an obsession of mine. I love snaps.
Is there like a I'm not sure, like, is there like a project that like you wish you could take on, but like you never had a chance to, or like the undertaking would just be redonkulous?
It's funny you mentioned. Yeah. So I burned out my backpacking pack at long last. I've had it for like 15 years, and there was a part of me that was standing at a thrift shop and I saw an external frame pack. And for those of you that are uninitiated to the backpacking community, internal frame packs are sort of the modern standard where you have like plastic or more modern materials that you'll have sewn into the bag, and they're really popular because they're really comfortable. But before internal frame packs or external frame packs, and you'll see those a lot in older communities for backpacking because it's like a big piece of metal or something that you have like a bag that attaches to it. And I was looking at external frames and realized I actually have everything that I need to do like an actual external frame pack, and so I could theoretically just like grab a frame and do that. But yeah, I mean the material investment and the time, I mean that's wholesale making something new. And even if I found like a decent condition external frame pack, there's a lot of modifications that would be needed, especially with the hip stuff, which the hip strap for most backpacks is that's really the important structural piece, and there's a lot of engineering that goes into it. So that's definitely not something I've been able to take on.
Um, so how long does it take you to do one of these projects?
I think a lot of that depends on the severity of the modification involved. It can be anywhere from a few hours to a few days. I've done for example for Christmas I did some of this upcycling because most of my family members will go through bags, and I just make them a new one because I've been at this for a while. And I did a satchel bag for my mom that I just put a new liner in it and did some repairs on it. Took me a couple hours, but I've also done 4 or 5 days of hardcore sewing on vacation or something. Sleepless nights sort of stuff. A lot of it really when you include the planning time, it can get
Mhm.
pretty extensive because you have to stare at seams and figure out how to do something without disassembling it.
Have you found like yourself leaning into like one aesthetic over the other? I know that you did your fantasy stuff and you did your camping stuff. Is there like any differences to working in like different like I guess look and feel type thing? Like, I'm not sure like what the proper word is for this, but like
Mhm.
an aesthetic or a style, or is it kind of like you can kind of float find yourself floating between them as long as you like have the core understandings?
Yeah, I think for my personal style, I definitely rock a very Boy Scout woodsman sort of look. It helps that I have a fairly large frame and I already favor sturdier materials. So when I'm camping, anyways, I'm usually wearing like a sturdy denim or like a twill sort of clothing. I usually lean into fabric on the spectrum of canvas. There's also a lot of like what they call it duck fabric. It's a type of canvas that's been treated with a waterproof, or it's like a nylon fabric that has a backing to it. So a lot of times I think I just come out looking like the Bear Grylls look, I guess, a little bit. I also think the other word that I would probably lean into is tactical, because I have again I try to avoid wearing a backpack when I'm out because I carry so little gear with me. So I have this big old fanny pack or something like that on that it looks kind of goofy, I guess. I have like molly webbing on it, for example, which I can equip pouches to, and so I end up looking like one of those guys you see in like an airsoft field that has like way too many pouches all over. But it's just because I'm like carrying like 3 days worth of food with me without actually having a backpack on.
Yeah, no, that makes, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. So I was gonna say, so would you say like the canvas is like one of your preferred materials to work with? Is it easier to get a hold of, or is it just like just durable in general?
I would say it's actually a combination of both. Canvas is really available in most fabric stores. It's also something that doesn't wear out nearly as often. And honestly, my favorite part of it is that you can sew it with nylon stitching. Nylon is easily the most durable thread. And if anybody that's listening is interested in getting into repairing clothing, or even just like basic backpack repair, honestly, I'd say nylon is my go-to. There are other threads that are specialized, but nylon is easily the easiest to find, and you can't just sew like nylon into anything. You need something really sturdy, but canvas is much lighter than denim by comparison, and since it comes in more colors, it does mean that you can kind of get away with getting a kind of a best of both worlds. It's like titanium in the aircraft industry. You kind of get like the strength and also the flexibility and lightweight aspects of both.
So I'm gonna say, speaking of like nylon, are there any materials that like you would suggest people like maybe starting out like try first? Are there things that you find to be a little bit easier to get a hold of or more affordable for people who are like just wanting to I guess get into this sort of hobby?
Mhm. Yeah, honestly, so nylon is it's a really great fabric because I mean, it's basically a sheet of flexible woven plastic, and it's waterproof, which is one thing that a lot of people use for backpacks for. And this is really where the upcycling aspect comes from because yeah, on one hand, like nylon is really expensive and hard to get a hold of, but also if you go into a thrift shop and you find like old hiking day packs, you can get a decent amount of nylon pretty cheap. One of the things that I would consider a part of this hobby is going into a thrift shop and finding things that I can then upcycle, and in that light, I mean, if you find a really sturdy backpack, right, that is made out of a good material like nylon, or they have more sophisticated stuff like rayon is something you see nowadays. You could definitely. Take advantage of the fact that thrift shops are going to be a lot cheaper. Even I mean, yeah, especially if you live in the West, there's a lot of like spiking in prices, and this has also been true for thrift shops as well. But I can still go into a thrift shop and get a 50 $60 backpack for $10, right? And at that point it's just a matter of manipulating it. I'd say the starting end of the hobby, it's probably just going to be starting with finding something that's already in decent condition. Washing it is going to be a must just because that's going to be a requirement, and then doing some basic repairs or simple modifications is a good place to start. But if you're looking for an easy way, honestly, I'd say military gear is a good one, especially if you live in the U.S. I see military gear all the time in thrift shops and junk shops and just about anywhere you go. And those backpacks are already durable. Most of them are waterproof to begin with. If you're not a big fan of camo, they do have military adjacent stuff you can find in surplus shops for cheap. And I'd say a lot of it really just comes down to having a clear purpose in mind for whatever you're buying. I mean, you mentioned having a work laptop, for example, that you got to carry around, and especially if you're doing tech work, doing like a big padded pouch is really important. That's not hard to sew in. You just find a decent backpack and one that has the space in it, and then you just make like a padded pouch that fits your needs, and then it's just a matter of sewing that into the main compartment of the bag, which you could do pretty easily.
Oh,
So,
okay.
Okay, so you say pretty easily, but I don't know the first thing about where to go to figure that out. What's is there a prerequisite that I need to take first here? Do I need to know my way? What's the base skill set I
Mhm.
need to be able to do that to sew that laptop pouch in?
I would divide this into two categories because sewing always comes down to two things. The first is a sewing machine, and the second is hand sewing. Sewing machines they take a little bit of work to learn how to use, and honestly, this is definitely not the type of thing you want to start on a sewing machine if you don't know how to use one. But hand sewing is fairly straightforward. The trick is that with hand sewing, you need to have really neat fabric skills. So if you're already doing plastic modeling, for example, which I imagine a lot of the Hanger V folks are going to like. It's about that attention to detail with it. They do make this is actually what if you've ever heard of a thimble. This is what thimbles are really good for because you're going to be pushing a needle through a lot of layers of fabric in some places on a backpack, and so you want some protection for your thumb. But yeah, really when you're talking about these sort of modifications, a sewing machine definitely helps, and knowing how to do that is helpful because it'll save you time. But also, I mean, you could do it via your hands, and the hand stitching community will tell you you could do this sort of thing pretty easily. It just will take longer. If you're going to sew in like a laptop pouch, I mean, that's probably going to be like 4 or 5 hours worth of stitching, but you could turn on your favorite TV show and give it a shot.
Okay. Um, and you mentioned what was it? Was this before we started recording? You mentioned a webbing that you
Mm,
liked.
mhm.
Um, is that a beginner accessible sort of thing, or is that where's on a scale of I am brand new at this to I am the master that we're interviewing here? Where is that on the skill level chart?
So mollywebbing, and for those of you listening, that's spelled Molle. It's an acronym. Molly is actually not hard to sew. So the main trick with mollywebbing is there's two components, and it's usually going to be a nylon strap that you use. On one part of the component is the base material, so you have like a bag that you're going to attach pouches to. That one's easy to sew. It's really just about laying out the strapping. You need to measure out using precise measurements anyways, and I mean, if you're getting into sewing, that's something you want to practice is measuring before you cut or sew anything. So it's actually not hard. A sewing machine definitely makes it really easy, but hand sewing mollywebbing, I mean, there's a lot of work to it, but it's definitely something you could do. The real trick is when you put together, if you're going to put together your own pouches, you'll need a snap gun, which you can get at any local craft store, and they're usually 30 to 40 bucks if you're getting a beginner one. But knowing how to put in snaps, that does take some practice. So I'd say snaps probably intermediate, but the rest of it is fairly easy to do. The nice thing though, you can get Molly spec pouches really easily. Military surplus stores sell them all the time. So if you're just modifying a bag to be able to attach pouches to it, you can skip the snap gun altogether. You can just simply go to a thrift shop, find those pouches, and as long as you've sewn the webbing is the actual straps you'd put on the main garment, and that, I mean, you're just following some measurements. It's 1.25 inches distance in between the various loops, and most people measure Molly on a grid. So if you're going to do, quote unquote, two loops wide, right, then that's just simply 2.5 inches across, and then you just sew like a divider in between them, so that way you can weave the pouch.
Hmm. Okay. And are there any resources you would recommend for people trying to get into doing this kind of sewing?
Definitely. There's honestly, we sometimes we call them maker fairs in my local area, but there's also tons of like sewing community oriented stuff. What I do is fairly eclectic with modifying bags, but a lot of the basic skills you can pick up online just by simply hopping on your favorite, video streaming platform. There's tons of books you can get. If you're in a thrift shop already, you can also pick up a sewing machine usually pretty cheap. Sewing machine maintenance is probably best left to the professionals, but you can get a gently used one probably for under $100. And generally, I'd say if you're already in a thrift shop, there's probably books about how to use sewing machines as well. I learned on old manuals that were printed 30 years before my time, and that combined with the limitless knowledge of the internet, you can pick up just about anything. I think ultimately the sky's the limit when it comes to fabric, and when you're doing this sort of upcycling, there's not really any limitations besides your creativity and imagination. Some people don't really care how their stuff looks, and when you get that way, the practice is really good. But if you really, really care care about, finding something that works really nicely. I'd say the biggest resource is find a bag or whatever you're trying to modify that you don't really care about, and give it a shot until you get it right. Even if you have to get a they call them a thread ripper. It's just a little or a seam ripper. You can tear out the seams if you don't like what you did, and then just sew back over it. You don't want to do that on something you care about though, because it'll wear out the fabric. But on a test
Mm.
piece, it's just fine. And I'd say that's, if you're trying to get into it, it's probably a good place to start. Books and then just practice.
Correct. Okay. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, cool. I'd love to keep picking your brain about this, and we might revisit it at some point. But I feel like I've learned a lot more than I expected about kind of like this upcycling, sewing, repurposing, thrifting, and I have maybe an idea for a tool roll that I might want to explore in the future. But thank you, Fata, for spending some time with us to talk about your one of your hobbies, and thank you for everyone listening. And if you want to listen to more, where you can find Hanger V Hobby Hangout on many platforms where fine podcasts are listened to. And we will see you in the next one.